epoxy glass panels or whatever. That sounds like a fun garage project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially to the laser cut pieces of PVC, like it's not like that's an expensive thing. Like you can just go to a woodworking place and be like, "Hey, I have this measurement. I need 50 pieces of wood cut into this shape, like these specific shapes." And then you
Yeah,
just
you
like
know,
glue and sandwich
you
the lot.
you can do that with like basically anything. I mean, laser
Mm,
cutting is cheap these days.
I know, but just have a look at I think the middle picture that like the second picture that I coded. If you zoom in on the speaker, no, but
Like
just
you
have
can,
see what it's made of. Like that is not like it's not an exotic like material at all. Like if this
I
was
swear
cut,
I've seen a
yeah,
DIY video on how to build this.
really, yeah.
Well, not
Oh,
like this, but yeah, this is a pretty common way to do it. I think it's kind of wasteful, but yeah, it's not uncommon. It doesn't look crazy, I guess. Oh, that that is definitely a Fostex driver. Wow.
yeah, I know.
Wow.
And I mean,
Yeah,
this
like
is,
this is like straight out of like a build guide, dude. Yeah, that's
mm.
interesting.
And I mean, that's just running. That's just the bass. Like that entire horn setup is just for the bass,
Wait,
and
what? Well, yeah, that's pretty clear. But what is that like wood donut thing sticking out the side? Is
that's the
that the
mid.
horn?
It's a horn waveguide, that thing, and then there's a titanium JBL. What do they call them? I said it like 10 times already.
It's
Compression. It's a
JBL compression.
compression driver, and that's just a zero diffraction waveguide.
I mean, yeah. eh, This is a really funky speaker.
I know, and like you're looking at it like, how is this time aligned? Like, I mean, look, the rail driver, you can
Ah,
you you
I mean, you
can
can't
move.
really speak for the time alignment, but that doesn't.
Doesn't
Usually, what you do when you make a speaker is kind of try and align things on the same plane vertically.
well,
That's
I think
This is
they've
a
done
little
that.
bit of an interesting interpretation of that.
Well, the RAL and the JBL driver and are basically in the same place. But the
Yeah,
horn,
but
the horn is yeah, the bass on the horn.
yeah, usually the horn. I know when JBL makes horns, they kind of set them back a little bit, I
Yeah,
think. So, cause the wave kind of gets emitted from the end of that horn,
and
which is where the
but
compression
it
stops.
also travels through about 15 feet of tunnel through the back there. Like before it comes out of the bottom of the horn, because there's like a massive spiral inside the top
Yeah,
part of
so
that.
we're gonna.
So,
Okay, maybe they're onto something, I guess.
hmm.
Maybe
As
I
far
don't know.
as
I don't know.
it compares to like my super solid state ATC super, like I don't know, like pro audio basically setup almost. Um, that I have. I would say that he's like I was listening to. I always make him play Rage Against the Machine on horns because they just usually disintegrate because they can't do cohesion. And like, of course, when I first get there, he's playing all this like classical music and like single instrument and single female vocal or single male vocal sort of music. And then I'm like, nah, chuck on like Rage Against the Machine because I know that track. Like, I know it's probably gonna disintegrate. And it
All
helped.
music.
It held up pretty well, to be honest. I did notice like the crashing of cymbals and stuff. Like when there was a lot going on, it starts to get rolled in the upper mids, and also when a lot goes on, it gets rolled in the sub bass. Like I think they've rolled it at about 38 hertz anyway. Like it has nothing under 38 hertz, and it rolls well before that. So most people who get the speaker buy a subwoofer. Apparently, Aries Surat sells a $75,000 horn bass system that they recommend goes with this. Of course they do. But most people just end up running like a Rel subwoofer or something like that with them because it does lack low end. They probably weren't like the end word in detail, but that might be the room as well. Like he has nothing in his first reflection points. One of his first reflection points is directly onto glass. He's got no diffusion other than junk in the room, basically. So there's like, yeah, the detail thing could maybe be enhanced. He reckons you can also tweak the shit out of these speakers. Like, the crossover network is like in this weird box at the back, and you can literally adjust. You can just tweak everything, like move it up and down if you want to. And also, he reckons the bias in the preamp can alter the change a whole lot. You can bias the tube to make it like warmer or brighter, depending on your preference. So, I don't know, I think there's a lot of tuning that can be done with this particular system, and I think the base of what you have has a lot of potential. So, I liked it quite a lot.
It seems interesting enough, but I mean, the question is whether or not this thing is practical, I guess. I mean, how much does it cost?
I think you're looking at for like that particular speaker model. I'm gonna give you prices in USD. It's like 80 grand probably for the speakers, and then the amps preamp. His streamer is about 20,000. The preamp is about 15,000. The amplifier is about 25,000.
Right,
The DAC he was running is about 7,500.
right. Forgive my my ignorance here, but I do think that might be a little bit unnecessary.
Oh yeah, but I mean, people who are buying this are, not exactly. They don't care about the cost. They're just,
No,
and a part of it is
you know,
they want something that other people don't have, like they're buying.
yeah. I
You
mean,
know.
definitely exclusivity. There is probably an audiophile clout factor to this, but
Mm.
I mean, this
But it
is
actually, it's 106 dB, high efficiency speaker as well. Like a lot of people love horns, and horns often have a lot of compromises. But this, as far as compromise goes, probably one of the least compromised horn systems I've heard.
well, when paying $80,000, I would absolutely hope it has minimal compromises in the horn.
Mm. Uh,
So
yeah, and that's
that's
the
a good
base.
thing.
I think there's like 6 levels of the Aries speaker as well, and his is the second from the bottom at 80 grand. I think they have a limited edition version that's about 170,000 US or something that apparently some guy in the States bought. And I think that
Weird.
just most of it has to do. It's the same drivers exactly, but it's just to do with the quality of the
The
finish.
clout.
The clout, yeah. We only made 3 of these, and you've got one, and yours is, rose.
You can brag about it on Sonic Visions.
Yes. Well, I don't know.
Yes.
No, anyone on Sonic Visions will probably just be like, "What?" and just blink at you. Funny, but
I don't think I can actually imagine that much money, let alone buy a bookshelf speaker that costs that much.
Mm.
But sounds like an interesting proposition.
I also have a DAC review coming, Smod, that you'll be interested in. I have an Abyss 2.3 coming. I have a Bracasti M3 coming. I have Tembaki coming. I think I was hoping the reason I went to this guy's house is because I wanted to borrow his Cassandra, because he has the Cassandra DAC, but apparently it's broken and he's got another one coming in 4 months, so that's not going to happen. So, and then
Yeah, that would be.
I contacted MSB as well and said, can you send me at least a reference? And he said, he's like, I got nothing I can send you for about 3 months as well. Apparently, all these guys have sold everything, and then there's like a 3 or 4 month wait time to get it back in.
Yeah, all these rich people kind of bought.
They can't go on holiday.
Yeah.
They can't go on holiday. They're
Right,
like,
right.
oh, I can't take my
Yeah.
$40,000 every 4 month river cruise in France, so better fucking buy myself a new DAC.
I think that yeah, if eventually if you can get your hands on Cassandra, that would be interesting. Even against your Rachna, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, just lost one. Oh, he's moved to listening. What's going on there? Oh, he's back. Yeah, I'd like to get Cassandra. I think it has potential. This guy is such an Aries nut, though. He's just like, oh yeah, Cassandra will absolutely smoke the rock now. It beats everything, and he's like trying to sell. There's like 7 levels of the Cassandra as well.
Yeah.
And then there's something called like the Homerus, which is like their pinnacle DAC, and it's 220,000 Australian dollars for a DAC. And I'm like, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. That's like a Ferrari 458. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and the Rachna I think is known for being a giant killer, right? When you compare it to I think you're the one that compared it to the MSB stuff.
I don't think it beats the MSB. I think the MSB Select is still the best DAC that I've ever heard, and it's 4 or 5 times the cost. But I kind of ignore the cost, and I don't like to say something's a giant slayer. Like, I mean, Rockner's very expensive, at its price point, and I mean, there's not many DACs that are in that price point that people have compared directly to other DACs. You got the Nagra, but I mean, nobody in the server has actually really heard the Nagra DAC and compared it to that. There's the Esoteric DAC, Vivaldi, a bunch of other stuff in that space. But I mean, I don't know if it's a giant killer because, I mean, you're just associating price with performance. And a lot of this shit is just marketing, man. Like, a lot of it's fancy boxes, big, heavy as possible, as big as possible, and then really strong marketing. These guys spend it all to do with how much they're spending on marketing as to how much they price the DAC. So you got to be mindful that when you say Giant Slayer, I'm like, I think Rockner's a good DAC. I think it's overpriced, but I think that's just audiophile land in general.
Well, maybe the right term is, high-end value king or something like that. Because if the thing is, if it's 95% of the performance of the Select, but like 10 to 15% of the price, I mean that's high-end value.
High-end
Well,
value.
but how are you determining that performance is the question.
Yeah,
Price to
that
performance.
95% is the question mark, and then then it begs the question of like, oh well, what if I told you that I think a Bifrost is 90% of a Rockner?
I told you I think an Apple dongle is 90%
you
of a
know,
Bifrost.
and then an Apple dongle is 90% of a Bifrost. Exactly. So now we're like, okay, so there's this, and
All right,
really
so
when you break
basically the proposition here is: will you spend $3,000 for 2 times Apple dongle? That is
yes,
the question.
that is exactly the question. So I just think it's very hard when you consider the price of audiophile equipment to see value sometimes. Like a $10,000 single-ended triode amplifier versus a good solid state amp that's like 150 bucks, a good a good Magni or something. Like, half the people who own those amps in an ABX would fail it. If it was a good single, like not a tubey sounding single-ended triode, like a solid state sounding, like most people would fail an ABX on this shit. And so it's like,
purposely trying to sound
and
different somehow.
unless it's purposely trying to commit
you could
sins
have a
of
high
commission.
frequency filter in there. Oh, there's your detail.
Exactly. So that's the other thing. Like, if it's actually doing its job and not committing sins and omission and commission, and then you compare it to a decent solid state amp that's also doing the same thing, that's absolutely budget, the difference is minuscule. It's tiny, and people couldn't tell in an ABX. So.
All right, but this is why I'm going to propose this now. This is why I prefer a different metric than price to performance.
Mm.
I prefer actually knob to performance ratio.
Ah, yes. Is
The bigger and better the knob,
and the tactility of the knob, like how much do you enjoy turning and playing with the knob is very
is it an
important.
enjoyable experience to touch the knob and to diddle the knob? Is it an enjoyable experience?
Yes,
that is
diddle.
what I judge my amplifiers by.
So you measure by diddle and fiddle. That's the most important part.
Diddle and fiddle. That's the metric, and I mean, if it doesn't sound like shit, then that's a bonus. So, I found Zendak to reach a pretty good compromise in that regard. It's very smooth.
Have you tried the streamers? Because they have quite a few streamers, don't they? Like
I have not. I was actually gonna buy one of the Zen streamers, but because I left my 590s in my parents' place, so I have an apartment. So that 590 is basically their TV setup now, the JBL Studio 590s.
Yeah.
But I had no way to get it running other than this really terrible system of Walkman as a Bluetooth receiver connecting to the garbage UI of the TV. So I just bought a $20 FiO DAC with an optical input, and it actually worked pretty nicely. So I don't know. But I was gonna buy a streamer for that instead. But then I was thinking, I don't have $200 to throw at a streamer, so I just bought the FiO thing, and it works pretty well.
Sorry, I had to just step away for a second because I had a smoke alarm. So I missed some of what you said, Zach. I'll listen back on the recording, but yeah, like my question is for high-end systems, price-wise, high-end
Mm.
or expensive, however you want to put it. I mean, it seems to me that the Rockna is not out of place in any of these high-end systems in terms of its sonic performance, and if it's delivering performance that is at least in the same league as something like an MSB Select, maybe it's at the level of a reference. You're gonna find out, I guess. Then my question is, what other DAC can do that for the money? For the
Well,
money, I
that's
mean.
I,
Mm.
it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think Zach can explain it better than I can.
Um, I think listen back to the recording, but I think Rockner has its place in like if you have a no compromise sort of system and you are sort of
No budget.
a no budget, you're a crazy audiophile. The Rockner has some really nice features and it's it's not a super colored DAC, but it might bring up the macro a little bit more. It might be a little bit more energetic than some other DACs. Like I think it has a really nice sound that works well with a lot of other audiophile type gear. So I think that's probably a reason it's so extremely popular is because of its particular tuning. And it's probably not a neutral tuning because honestly, like if you go for a completely neutral tuning DAC, like it's just a DAC. Like it sounds like just a DAC.
It's
So
doing its job.
it's doing its job.
That's not.
So a lot of people don't realize that they are chasing a particular sound and tuning and signature. They're not just looking for what they say they listen to something pure, but their interpretation of pure is like will be an enhancement of what is actually recorded. Because what you gotta remember what is recorded as well. It's not like the fucking mixing artist like was some sort of savant like hiding detail in the track like and that you're like on a mission to find it. Like it's like most of your biggest limitation in audiophile land often is the recording quality. Like these guys just don't care. Like they don't. There's very few, and the artists who do care about it aren't probably to most people's taste in music.
Well, yeah. I mean, it is really down to the recording. I mean, no, I don't really see this too often here. But if you look at like the Facebook audiophile groups, um, it's a bit of an interesting vibe where
They're price
they're
objective.
all, well they make assumptions on like these weird I guess pieces of kit that they buy based on that it would somehow bring in some unperceived quality that like the mixing artist who had like his magic tone board somehow put
Mm,
in a track, and you have to bring that out with your like $10,000 cable or something.
yeah, I don't know. I think there's some ill-conceived notions, and I think like I said, the marketing is really strong in audiophile hobby.
It
Like I
is
mean.
very strong.
That's like the biggest part of the hobby of the probably the sales and stuff of audio gear is not price to performance. It's like how well it's marketed. And it's interesting because Rockner doesn't really market themselves that well. They aren't really
No, but
targeting the market like that.
no, but but we have to remember that like people who review and say, oh well, this $3,000 DAC is actually a really good value for some reason. That stuff kind of tends to propagate itself, and then if you
Mm.
manage to break into that, then you might not really need a whole lot of marketing, anyways. It's kind of doing itself. It's it's creating its own marketing, I guess, just by the
But
sort
then
of clout it's receiving.
it still has to deliver something
I mean, it has
unique.
to
So I
deliver
think
acceptable
yeah,
performance.
yeah.
You know, I mean, sometimes that isn't the case. Actually, I've seen this, but you know,
Oh yeah,
I
I've
mean,
seen that too, where DACs have what I would deem unacceptable performance, yet still
if
gain.
you're building a deck that costs more than like a couple $100, then really is it like you would have to try really hard to make a level of performance that is outright unacceptable
Hmm.
to everyone, objectively speaking.
I don't know. I
You
think
would have to. I think you would genuinely have to try.
Nah, you can have huge problems with jitter
I mean,
and
you
latency,
can,
and
but
if
like,
you don't have a very good, USB interface, like, and the power
well, yeah,
supplies
I
are
mean,
noisy, like,
look, like, how much do these USB interfaces cost, right? Like, how, like, how many manufacturers are using the same USB controller, right? Coming
well,
from
that's the
or
thing though.
similar specification.
A lot of them were using shitty ones for years, and it was only up until lately that XMOS sort of became like the standard. And then like a lot of people like may use XMOS, but they built like a proprietary. You go have a look at what the Hollow group put as their USB interface, like the
Well,
hardware and
if
stuff.
it's, is it good?
Yeah, it's great. It's like
Yeah.
completely galvanically isolated, it's just very well designed to try and
Well,
minimize any sort of, power fluctuations coming from any other part of the board.
that sounds pretty neat. Um, but yeah, anyways, though, like, I'm just saying, like, $3,000 DAC, like, you're gonna have to really, screw something up to make it to a point where it's genuinely unacceptable. I think. I would hope.
What are you
Maybe
gonna
it's
say,
just wishful
Spawn?
thinking.
No, yeah, I was gonna say that. What is the price level in general, where after which it's more just about the tuning and purely the tuning and purely the synergy? Is there a level where technically DACs get as good as they can, and beyond that it's just tuning and synergy?
Yeah, it's like $100, man.
Books.
A Modi, a Modi probably would suit
Yeah,
99%
Modi's.
of people.
No,
Yeah,
It does the
like
job.
how hard is it to clip a Modi?
okay, so
Hmm.
so let's say I put together a whatever it is, like a 20K, 30K, 50K system, whatever, pick whatever level you want, and
Hmm.
that's not including a DAC, and I put in a Modi, and then I put in an Yggdrasil. Is the Modi going to extract all the same micro detail that the Yggdrasil will?
I think it.
Probably.
I think that you might find that the Yggdrasil does a bit more. Like that, the design of the Yggdrasil compared to the Modi is like, it's obviously far more extreme. It's far more complicated. It's R2R.
Yeah, I mean,
It's.
if the Modi is doing its job, then yeah, it should be able to work just fine in that system.
I sort of semi disagree. I think there might be a small improvement from the Modi, but like the chasm that people draw with Dax is non-existent in my opinion. So I would say the Modi is like what we talked about earlier, where I'd say that it's
Okay.
90%. It would do
Yeah, but
90% of what the Yggdrasil does, and the
but
Yggdrasil is tuned a little bit to bring up detail.
yeah, right. But like, I mean, yeah, obviously you can get theoretically a better specs, but I mean, you're claiming, yeah, you yourself said it's very small differences. So,
Hmm.
my question is how much of that stems from things like user bias or whatnot, or some
Bias,
other
justification, and stuff
unforeseen
like that.
changes that aren't exactly related to direct performance. I mean, like, I'm trying to put my thoughts
But
together, but
there isn't a different in architecture that will result in a slightly different sound. Like when you
but
look at Yggdrasil's
but
setup,
the
like it's a true multi-bit, kind of architecture, which does typically have a warmer and thicker sound. But I mean, which one's the
yeah,
more neutral? Which one is
right, like
actually
if
presenting
it's
the sound correctly? Then which one is actually the zero
right, like
sins
if you're
of
looking for
chemistry?
coloration, then yeah, of course, the analog hardware of the DAC, you can change that around and you can make it sound different, or you can do it
Hmm.
digitally within the firmware. But like within like just raw specifications of actual performance, how well is it converting? How well is it doing its job? I think
Hmm.
there's the threshold of audibility is very
That's another discussion though.
very
Like
limited.
that's another discussion because it's like if you just had to
But
measure
I
something
think it
purely
ties well into this.
on the Synad and the IMD sort of performance, you'd just be like, oh
Right,
well, I
right,
can I can set up my
like
whole
like like
system
like
to
saying that
be.
performance, like past like the threshold of audibility isn't all
Hmm.
that high. So at a certain point, like you mentioned earlier with coloration and synergy or whatever, or
Hmm.
tuning of the DAC, you have to start adding things to it to make it a little bit more of a bespoke experience and to make it feel like you're getting your money's worth out of it, like something has changed.
I don't know. I think I think you can't look at it purely objectively, unfortunately, with DAX. To me, the difference between a $100 Modi and a $2,000, Modi is the price difference is like not enough for me to really care. Like they're basically both fall in the same ballpark of I don't really care. It's not that much money. The difference with the Yggdrasil for me would be that its staging is a lot wider. It has that little bit more detail. It has a grayer, like if you're talking about Yggdrasil 1 or analog, there's like 3 variations, and now there's MIL and less is more and a whole bunch of other variations of Yggdrasil. But I'm just kind of talking about like Yggdrasil 1, like the OG DAC that came out, R2R, one of the first, major R2R DACs to fall in the sub 2,000, like the sub $3,000 kind of price point, sorry. And it does do some things a bit differently to normal Delta Sigma DACs. The sound is different. But at the same time, you got to ask yourself, like, is this a coloration and tuning thing, or is this just actually performing better? And the performance specs are they are a bit better. But the other question is they can't measure soundstage. Like, there is actually no way to objectively measure soundstage on a DAC. You cannot. They literally sound different, and the human ear can detect it. And there's been times where they've done like listening sort of experiments, I guess, with ABXs. Tile did a really good one a few years ago, and he had a whole bunch of people come and listen to a bunch of DACs and stuff, and they had to evaluate them and score them, and he made them listen to really high-end stuff, and Yggdrasil was one of the DACs there. And there was a couple of people who, with like 97 to 98% accuracy, were able to pick the differences in these DACs. And one of the things that one of the guys mentioned was he said it was the staging that was one of the easiest ways to subjectively pick the differences, right? But yeah, you can't measure that. Like, there's no objective measurement to standardize and work out how these things. So I feel like that you sort of, when you look at the measurements, you're really still looking at a 2D image. Like, you're looking at a 2D representation of what is a far more complex subject. Like, we don't actually have the technology to measure these things. And then, I mean, each person obviously has their own differences, but you can't measure this stuff. There's no way to just say this scores a 7 out of 10 and this scores a 9 out of 10. Therefore, this is going to have a slightly wider stage, or a slightly taller, or a slightly deeper stage. We don't know. So, Yggdrasil staging shits all over most DACs under its price point, as well as like detail wise, transient edge. It had some things that cheaper DACs just haven't really managed to pull off for me without some other massive compromise. So I don't know. I think Yggdrasil had its place and almost justified its price, But that's for me who doesn't care about the difference from 200 to 2,000, But for someone else someone who expects 10 times the performance from $100 or $200 or whatever the Modi cost to the $2,000 Yggdrasil is going to be very upset, because they're going to find that if you compare the two in an ABX, there's a slight difference. We're talking like 10, 15% max.
Yeah, something perceptible.
Something perceptible, not measurable, but I don't know if you can say one is objectively better or worse because it's imparting part of its sound as well. Just because it's like, how are you measuring this? The level of tuning that's going on. Because I don't want to go full, audio science here. Because the DACs they like if you go and listen to like some of the toppings and stuff, they measure incredibly well, but it sounds like a typewriter, man. Like it's jittery. It sounds horrible. Like the tonality's not great, and just because it measures like really
flat.
No, well, I mean they're flat, but they don't sound the way I'd expect them to sound. Like instruments fall flat. Like timbral things aren't as well rounded and nuanced type thing, and you start saying, oh well, it's measuring fine, so it should be performing fine. But you just, like I said, there's some cheaper DACs that sort of do a lot of the things right, but then other ones that perform, like they measure really really well, like they measure audibly within perfect range, but they sound like shit, and I you couldn't pay me to leave them in my system. So I don't know, riddle me that.
I don't know. I think that's a pretty big point of contention that honestly I don't really have the knowledge to get into, but.
It's like there's two sides of the hobby. It's objectivist versus subjectivist. It's existed since like the very start, Objectivists say, oh well, the amp measures fine, so it should be exactly the same as your $30,000 Aries Syrah. You're just paying for tube warmth and bloom, and you're paying for tasteful THD.
I mean, I think oftentimes that can be the case, really, but
It can be, but I think hardcore objectivists miss the point sometimes as well. It's like let's look at photography for instance. You can take a photo with these ridiculous, insane high resolution DSLRs now or whatever, and they take these incredibly huge files, like several gigabytes worth of data to take a single photo. And some people out there still prefer using like the analog photos because they have like a level of depth and stuff that you just can't really get, despite having more resolution and more dots per square inch. Sometimes the analog photograph just gives you like a truer rendering of what you're looking at, and some people prefer that. And now you're looking at going, well, one's objectively way better than the other because it's got far more information.
Well, no, it's not an issue of objectively better, but clearly there is an objective difference between the two.
There is an objective difference, but then the subjective preference is towards a thing that has what would be, the objectively inferior amount of data.
Well, yeah, but you don't judge a picture by the amount of data that it holds, anyways.
Well, that's the same, but that's the same by the audio stuff. Like you don't judge a piece of audio equipment based purely on the objective data. You have to listen to it, honestly.
Well, yes, of course you do. Of course you do. But I mean, going back to the photo analogy, I mean, clearly, if let's say, yeah, if you do prefer that type of style of image, I mean, you can see the specifications of the roll of film and whatnot, and see, okay, well, maybe like if you're buying a roll of film rather than going for a high-end digital digital camera, you can see that, okay, well, maybe this would fit my use case better. Having maybe this would fit my stylistic preferences better because I can see the data here, and it seems to trend towards one thing that I would probably like. So, and I think you can kind of do something similar with audio to an extent.
You could try to break it down, but I just don't have the correlation between objective performance and subjective performance that you'd expect. The better measuring something doesn't always mean for me that it's going to be the better sounding or the thing that I enjoy the most. And that's the other thing is like that objectivists get caught up on. They just think it's you got to have the strongest possible measurements. But then if you compare the strongest possible measurement to something that measures worse and it sounds better, why would you correlate that and keep doing the same thing and keep chasing better measurements?
Right. And that's one thing I wanted to get into is, what actually qualifies as better measuring. If you have you have a preference towards one thing. I mean, obviously, like let's say if you like the sound of a tube amp with whatever coloration and distortion or whatever it brings, and clearly it has it has higher noise floor and things like that than other amplifiers, but you like that, you like what it brings, then clearly to you that if you something that measures objectively, I mean, for lack of better words, cleaner, I guess, won't work out. And so, to you, I mean, that set of data just doesn't work in your case. And so you can't exactly claim that, oh, well, this thing measures quote unquote better, because, obviously if it doesn't work for your case, if it doesn't align with what you actually need, then is it measuring better?
Yeah.
Right. So it just depends on what qualifies.
Exactly. But my question to hardcore objectivists is that, have they been open enough to listen to a range of stuff that doesn't measure that well, and do an ABX and then listen to instruments to see what actually resonates with them and sounds, more enjoyable or more correct to them? Because for me, I want instruments to sound in my head, because I've played a lot of music and been to a lot of concerts and stuff. Like for me, tonality and timbre is really important. Dynamics are really important, and transient edge really important. So when I hear an instrument, I want to hear it almost emerge from the background so suddenly that if I'm not looking, it instantly draws your attention. It's like speed of sound, kind of holy shit, there's an instrument here in the room right now. And there's again no way of really measuring how that behaves in any audiophile system. It's not like you can kind of hook it up to the output jacks and be like, oh yeah, it measures that, so it's going to have this transient speed that, you know, is just going to be unbelievable, and no one's really tuning specifically for that. So the
Well,
only
that's a very tricky thing actually. Because if you're like, let's say I talk to Oratory or one of the other engineers, you're what you generally speaking, what is considered most of those descriptors kind of all goes back to tonality in one way or another. It's a very tricky thing to figure out. I mean, obviously, they're what you hear is one thing, but they kind of tend to go back to that, and if it goes back to that, then you can get the FR for a certain goal, for a certain way. I mean, just pinning down, what part of the FR actually correlates to these descriptors that you bring up is a little bit of a trickier issue.
That's what I semi-disagree with that as well, because the FR is just a two-dimensional image of like a response. Like the way you actually hear it in a room is completely different. And I mean, they don't even really understand this shit.
In a room, there's an FR at a point. So if you kind of form the room around how you want it to be at that one point.
It's for me, that's like about 5% of the story. Like you get a general idea about how the thing performs, but you definitely won't. You can see rooms that have similar FRs and go and listen to the two of them, and they sound completely different.
When it comes to like large like room acoustics, it gets a little bit trickier because unlike headphones, which are very small spaces, you do have to deal with things like how time delay will really affect clarity and things like that. And at that point, it's like you don't really have that nice, perfect, or not perfect, but nice, predictable space that you would in like an earphone or a headphone. And then it becomes really tricky. And so,
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Headphones are going to be, it's a more controlled environment, and FR probably
that's what I work with. That's what I'm used to. So,
has more value there. But again, I've just tried. I tried the objectivist thing when back in the day when we first everyone was kind of doing the objectivist thing to start off with, and I was doing sorry, my partner's just messaging me. Like I had all the JDS, the O2, the new Av guy. I was following that stuff closely because I was like, if I get it and it's measuring good enough, and the whole audiophile scene is a joke. And I tried the O2 DAC, and I tried like a whole bunch of these like really insanely measuring things, and I was like, man, I was just like, always thought that it just never sounded right. Like it never even sounded great, And so I don't know. In my journey, then I was like, well, I'm just going to be open and listen to everything. I'll listen to tube DACs. I'll listen to RTR. And then I sort of found signatures that I thought, oh, this sounds more correct to me. Like this sounds more like I want it the way I want things to be rendered or presented.
Right. If you want to, and it. Like I think a lot of people, they miss that point of like, okay, well, how, like regardless of how well it performs or whatever, or even certain, because like a lot of people they obsess over things like SINAD where this I'm going to, in a similar way to people like let's say spending $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on a DAC, let's say. Just maybe for for some more intangible reason, some people will they'll say, oh well, I need to spend $1,000 on a topping DAC that measures very well in a certain extremely specific way that may not even matter to audibly to sound quality past a much lower threshold than what it's actually capable of. And some people get really really caught up with things like that. And so, I personally, I think, like what you said, people should explore beyond that because, they're like just, if it sounds good, then it's good, right? Like, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
If it sounds good, then it's good. That's it.
True. I think the question more was just like, does it have to objectively be a certain level before we'll even look at it type thing? Because I think Smod was saying, when at what point do I need to buy, a $2,000 DAC for my $25,000 system? And I mean, that also begs the question of like, when do you buy a few $1,000s worth of cables? And I mean, technically never, but I mean, like for some people, it's like Technically never, but if you're at a point where you literally have maxed out everything and you want some thick ass cables because they make you happy and smile and you like the way they look and you may think that they have some level of performance, sure, why not? Just waste your money if you want to.
If the wait. Look, if the placebo works, then is it really a placebo?
Yeah, exactly. And the old saying is like the more expensive the placebo, the better it works. And I mean, and that's also objectively
If you don't know if it's a placebo, then it works.
Then it works even better. But I mean, the more expensive the placebo is, that's backed by science now. If I gave you running shoes and they're exactly the same as some cheap running shoes, and I tell you that they're worth $10,000, you're going to run faster. So
well, you could try.
well,
I don't feel like you're running faster.
There's a study done where people who are running with objectively with more expensive shoes that were objectively exactly the same as a cheaper shoe ran faster times. And this was a big controversy in the Olympics a long time ago because obviously America and some of the developed countries had an advantage because their athletes were using suits and stuff that were objectively better performing, but it was also the notion that they knew that everything they had was probably the best, and they were saying that this gives them an advantage over other athletes who know that they're not performing with the best equipment, the best coaches, the best everything. But yeah, you can actually standardize it.
There you go.
And they did one with a painkiller as well, where they gave some people Panadol Nurofen mix. They gave some people a placebo, and then they gave some people a placebo that they said was worth 10 cents, and they gave some people a placebo that they said was worth $10,000. And the placebo that was worth more money performed better than the drug, like 9 times out of 10. So
there you go.
The more expensive the placebo, the better it works. So the more expensive your cables, the better your system will sound to you. Which is like...
No, it's a good point.
Because it's a placebo, right? You're agreeing that it's a placebo,
yeah.
Yeah, so that's how it works.
Okay, there's something here though in the voice general chat. I'm not sure if you saw this, but Josh Moe asked if you had to enter a bathtub that is full of a certain type of food, what type of food would you choose?
Oh, I love it. This is way more fun. We should get Josh in here if he's stupid. Mike's not being an idiot. He's so much fun. Okay, you go, Dwan. What are you getting into a bathtub full of? You gotta remember that it's an actual bathtub. It's gonna be, you're gonna get messy.
Right.
Look.
Okay, what kind of bathtub would I get into?
It's a really clean bathtub. Like you'd eat off.
Yeah. Okay, we're assuming a situation where it wouldn't,
make the experience.
Make disgusting. Okay. Shit. I don't.
You don't want anything too hot or chilly because it could be painful.
I think objective. The best way to get into this is make the whole bathtub a large bowl. It is cool. It has a good texture to it. It is fucking delicious. So I think it's a good all around experience.
So what are you going with?
A large poke bowl of a bathtub.
A poke bowl. Yeah, that's a good one. I was gonna go with jelly just because I thought the texture would be fun to just be sitting in a pile of jelly.
No, but you see the very texture of the poke bowl, and it still has a little bit of that jelly-like texture because of the fish and other things in there. But then there's a little bit of a variation from the seaweed and stuff like that. So, from the rice.
And you could have any kind of meat
rice at the bottom.
That would be good.
Back support,
Imagine how many different types of rice bowl you could run at the same time. You could have salmon. You could have Wagyu beef. You could have have all your edamame and your wakame everywhere. Oh, imagine the wakame.
I want a bathtub full of rice and fish.
Yeah. Okay. One's right.
I really want that now.
We vote poke bowl. Poke bowl's good call. Boba. The boba ball just Holy wants to get into a giant bubble tea.
I can see a lot of very unpleasant things happening with the boba.
All right, let's get into some topics here. Welcome anybody just joining us. This is Sonic Visions podcast episode 18. Joined by Juan and Zach. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mod. Thanks for having us, mate.
Yep. And Juan, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm fighting my microphone at the moment to stay on, so I will be leaving and entering randomly.
Okay.
All right, fair enough. I got a lot of the DAC discussion and intro discussion in the recording. I started the stream about 45 minutes ago, so we did capture that, so that's good.
I was hoping for this.
Yeah, yeah. I'll probably start doing that just because sometimes there is a lot of really good discussion before the show even starts, so we want to not miss that. The first question today is about amplification types. We have different topologies, I guess, of or classes of amplification. A, B, Class D. There's more than that. Among the different types, is there one that you prefer, and what are the typical pros and cons of the common classes of amplification?
This goes back to our discussion we just had, well, for the last 20 minutes, I guess, is like the objective versus subjective performance and the rest of it. But I'll let Juan start this one.
Geez, I don't have strong opinions on this one. I think it's mainly determined by more practical reasons. The efficiency and whatnot. I think there's a good reason for like most little mobile amps being Class D and stuff like that. But I don't really have strong opinions on this. If the amp sounds good, then it doesn't really matter all that much. Aside from certain design requirements, I guess. Because like you're not going to put a Class A amp on a smartphone, right?
No, but I mean, there's
it would be too inefficient to be impractical.
Class D amps are sort of finding their way into like upper high end, and they're just like they're just chip amps, and they're not overly expensive, but they are finding themselves into some of the higher end.
And that type of topology, it's practical, or like I said, what is the amplifier trying to achieve with its design? Yeah.
I don't know if you say is one inherently better than the other. I think pros and cons of each is probably the right way to go about it. Like Class D amplifiers have been traditionally used or more commonly used as, bass drivers or subwoofer drivers. They measure really, really well. They don't really sound particularly great in the mids. They can sometimes be used in the upper mids and like highs. I've seen some people use Class D amps for like really sensitive like horn for the highs, which is interesting because some people like its sound there. I'm a big fan of Class A. For me, that's probably the sound I usually go for if I'm doing big amps and stuff like that. And AB, you can get a lot of power out of them, but I'm not particularly fond of the sound. It just again depends on the design is more than just the Class A or Class AB. There's too many factors to really say pros and cons of each, but I think they all have their place in the hobby. But I don't know about the Class D and the high end. That's boggling my mind a little bit.
I think it's all down to the individual amplifier. What is it doing? Or what is it supposed to be doing?
I guess one thing I would ask as an add-on to that is if and it seems like Juan has a certain perspective that is intriguing me. If we say that there's no inherent general sonic advantages of one class over the other, why would we not use a class that's more efficient, doesn't require massive heat sinks, doesn't have all these power requirements? Why don't we always use Class D, and what's the value of Class A ever?
Well, I think you kind of answered that question. I mean, assuming, are you assuming like just, for the sake of discussion, no audible differences, or?
No, I'm not assuming that, but I was wondering if you were assuming that, or suggesting that Class A has no inherent sonic advantage, and if that's the case, there are objective advantages of Class D. As I mentioned, it doesn't get super hot. It's more efficient. Generally, the amps can be made to a smaller size. So why not always use Class D? Why are companies using Class A amplification at all? Is it just marketing, or what's the reason?
I don't know. I'm not in the amplifier business, and these are not questions for me. But if we were to make the bold assumption of all of these topologies sound pretty much the same. All right, if we were to make that assumption, then yeah, I mean, if you look at the industry where things are kind of moving towards these really high performance chip amps and whatnot that can be built at scale very cheaply, are very efficient, they're very cool. You can put them in integrated. You can integrate them into the speakers very easily, into powered speakers and whatnot. So I mean, it seems that the industry is kind of embracing that as a whole. Now, whether or not that has, you know, whether or not the value to audiophiles of the other topologies is its relevance is not really, for me to describe.
Look, it's hard to actually to knock the Class D amplifiers when you look at the performance on paper. It's and like you said, like if chips weren't so expensive because of COVID, they would make a ton of sense right now because
even with COVID, I mean, you can still get friggin' TI chip amps with like 50 watts of power and good enough power for good enough specs for like $20. So
Yeah, well, I mean, you do get good specs for the money, and I think as we discussed earlier with Dwan and myself, like, you gotta sort of hear these things and compare them yourselves. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense when these things pump out a ton of watts and they cost bugger all and they're very cool and they're cheap to build and, they're not that sensitive to just about anything. Like, they have a little bit of feedback to control them, but that's about it. But I've heard some Class D amps. I have a friend who's lent me some Encores and stuff, and I've run them with a bunch of different headphones and mess with them. And I don't particularly like the way that particular chip sounded. I've heard about 3 different Class D amps, and none of them have made me say or think, I want to sell all my stuff and switch over to Class D. And I mean, and I wouldn't care. Like, if you told me that I could buy an amp that costs $100 that smokes everything that I have, I'd be like, power to you, I'll buy it, straight away. But I mean, as much as it's been picked up by a lot of mobs, you'll still find that in active speakers, in the entry level, they're using Class D, but as soon as you go to their mid and higher end stuff, they go back to Class A or Class AB. So
yeah,
I think that speaks volumes, and that's in the pro audio scene as well. They don't care about audiophiles. They don't care about making audiophiles happy by having happy signatures. Like this is for mixing and mastering guys, and they still haven't adopted Class D into the mid to higher end pro gear. So that to me that says something. But
maybe there's something going down there. Like I said, I'm not in that business,
but
and I really can't speak for it.
objectively, Class D is amazing. You look at the measurements and you go, "Wow!"
But then Zach, if you could delve a bit deeper into that, so can you speculate on why these kind of the pro audio or the more quote unquote high end companies, why are they using Class A or AB?
They don't. They don't just test. Don't just test with objective measurements. They got to put this stuff in a chamber and sit and listen to it, and they compare it. They would have done it. They would have put Class D amps in the mids. They would have chucked them on the bass. They would have chucked them on the highs. They would have mixed them with A, B, and A, and they went with what they thought was going to be, the best sounding, like not just the best measuring. So I still think it boils down to that. It's not just a hard science of what measures the best. Let's just put that in and everyone will be happy. It doesn't quite work like that. So that's why I think the Class A and Class AB. I don't think the people at the high end ATC went, oh no, well we'll lose customers if we put Class D amps in because they won't think we're spending as much money, on the gear. They think we're cutting corners, so we better keep it Class AB. I don't think that's what's going through their head at all. I think they tested it. They went, oh well, we could have cut costs here, but look, it doesn't sound as good. So well, fuck, we better stick with what we're doing.
So I think I don't know if I'm correct on this, but I do think apparently there were some very notable benefits at like really high output with certain amplifier topologies. I don't remember though.
And then the other follow-up question would be, is there, and of course you guys have heard many different amplifiers, is there any inherent sound to the different classes that you guys have noticed? Anything common, for example, among different Class A amps, different AB amps, different D amps? Is there anything really common or not really?
I personally haven't really experienced that. I've heard class A, B headphone amps that sound very not 100% the same, and I've
Yeah.
heard I've heard class D amps that sound close to class A amps like that. I don't know. I couldn't really say there was something super specific about it.
A particular sound signature of each one. I agree. I think there's too many variables beyond just the topography. I would
That's
say.
why I say it's down to the individual, amplifier more so, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because I mean, I've heard Class D that sounds super hard and flat, and I've heard Class D that sounds like almost like a bit flabby in the bass end and like not as tight as I'd expect for it. And I mean, the synad and the measurements on these things are insane. It's like, well, how does this thing sound distorted at all when you're looking at the THD measurements? Like, this should not sound distorted at all. But I don't know. I'd agree with one. There's no
Apparently,
particular sound.
apparently IMD might play a bigger role in that.
Hmm.
Who knows? Like if you look at the ESS amps, I don't really know a whole lot about this until recently, but apparently a few dB difference in IMD is actually can actually be noticeable, but who knows? And sometimes that's not exactly looked at over THD. So,
Nick joined us. Welcome, Nick. You there?
Yes, sir. Thanks so much. I'm enjoying the conversation.
The question, if you want to just weigh in, Nick, is between Class A, B, and D amps and any other classes, is there one you typically prefer, and are there any pros and cons that you would want to talk about with different classes of amplification?
Sure. Let me clarify that I have not heard any audiophile Class D amps. I have listened to Class A, B, and H amps. And someone had mentioned earlier, it depends everything that's behind it. As far as the class itself, I don't think you can come to any specific conclusion because there's too many variables.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. I heard that the same manufacturer in Class A and Class AB, and I would say that everything being the same manufacturer and all, the Class A does sound a little bit warmer, if you could say that. And when I say warmer, I'm meaning sounding closer to tube amps and more natural than the Class AB. But all in all, Class AB sounds just fine compared to the Class H I've heard, and like I said, everything else is all relative. It all just depends on the rest of the gear and the way it's put together. So I don't think you can say Class A is better than Class AB. And well, who's manufacturer Class A and who's class manufacturer AB? So I don't think you can just do that flat out.
Okay. Yeah, there's a new amp from Griffin, and they kind of get into this on their website about the different classes and how they feel Class A is the best. But I think this is analogous to chips, where you could have a certain chip in a Delta Sigma DAC, but that doesn't mean it's going to have a certain sound because it depends on the rest of the components and the way it's built and that kind of thing. So I think that makes sense that you could now what I'm curious about is there a pure Class A amp that sounds extremely thin and bright? I'm sure you could make it, but I wonder if there's something that exists like that. I'm curious.
I
Not that I can recall really.
Yeah.
A Class A amp with a capacitor in front of it.
I'm trying to think.
sounds like this argument is similar to implementation, where you go from DAC chips to class of amp. Most of it's an implementation and it's little with everything else.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Okay. The next topic is about listening to music more for productivity or when you're trying to be productive rather than just pure enjoyment. Is that something you guys typically do? And if you do you use your hi-fi systems, or do you have a separate chain to do that for productivity?
Oh man, uh, that is definitely something I do, and usually in such a case, I would probably rather use a better system than not. I couldn't really tell you why, but it I mean I use whatever I enjoy, and if that to me that counts as the better system. So that's about it. If I don't have something good on hand, I'll just EQ it.
You'll EQ it.
Yeah, why not?
I think that for me, the music is a factor. The type of music I listen to, it might be the same system, but if I'm kind of going into kind of productivity mode, I tend to go to more ambient music, more kind of less, music that's maybe less engaging, more relaxing. That way, it doesn't kind of pull me out of the productivity mode as much.
Yeah, then that was my question about this category altogether. When you're talking productivity, what are we talking about? Are we talking about producing music or doing some other chore? Or, I'm not sure what you're driving at when you say productivity.
When I say productivity, I mean doing some kind of
Yeah.
work as opposed to play. Work versus play.
Oh, okay. I can comment to that whenever we get around to me.
Go ahead.
Oh, you
Oh,
are, yeah.
well, we do it every day in our kitchen. There's, before we get busy at work, we'll crank up some tunes, and it's hard to have quality in the kitchen. I mean, anything that's in the kitchen is going to get grease and dirt and this and that on it. So, it's more about volume and the kind of music you're listening to. And even then, once you get in, let's say we get busy, but there's no one in house yet, but we have a bunch of orders hitting us. We'll leave the tunes cranked up, but they'll disappear when you start concentrating on what you're doing and the function of getting the work done. Don't even hear the music. It just kind of, in our minds, there's a switch that just turns it off. And then when we start to get caught up and we're getting back to, okay, we see the light in the tunnel, we're just about done all this craziness, then the music starts to creep back in and we start jamming and moving to it and such. But when you really start concentrating, it just disappears as if it's not even there. So
Yeah.
I'd go with the type of music is more important than the quality of music. I mean, yeah, you don't want to hear horrible sound, but you're not really worried about you're not listening critically listening. It's the word I was looking for. You're not doing that when when you're working, when you're supposed to be concentrating at work. Now, when you're playing and polishing cars, working mechanics, or mowing the yard, whatever you're playing or having fun, unless you're just there to listen to the music or critically listen to the music, I don't think the chain really matters. It's more about what you're playing at the time, and that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I find is that sometimes, yeah, and I agree with that. Like, just you don't need a really high end system if you're using it for productivity, or listening to music while you're being productive. What I find is that it's interesting though, because on a good system, let's say you're at your desk and you're at your desk audiophile system, sometimes a certain part of a song will start, or there'll be a certain kind of phrasing in a song, and it will be so good that it kind of pulls you out of the work, and you kind of refocus on the music, and then you say, wow, that was really awesome, and then you kind of maybe take a little break and then do a little bit of critical listening for a little while and then get back into your productivity. So it's like the one of the benefits I think of doing this is that there's kind of built-in breaks that you get through moments of musical inspiration or hearing something really, really fantastic. So that's one thing I find. But I agree with you that when you get really, really focused, the music does kind of fade away and you're just focused on the work.
Right, and I agree with you completely. I wasn't even thinking about, most of my work is not sitting at a desk station and such, so
Right.
it didn't dawn on me. Yeah, absolutely. Some of the great new artists I hear, or some new music, is I'll be doing some computer work, and I'll be doing this and that, and that's usually when I'm in my cave and I have a high end system turned on anyway. And you're absolutely right. All of a sudden, something will catch you, and you're like, "Okay, work is turned off while I check this out." It's like, "Oh yeah," and then you get lost in the music to the end of the song, or the LP, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I needed that break, and that was neat. Who was that? Make a note of it and go back to what you were doing." So I agree with you absolutely there.
All right.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think it's a,
Oh, sorry. Go
yeah, I
ahead.
think it's a good thing as long as you can get back into the work.
All right, fair enough. So let's go on to the next topic. The next topic is around. So I want to focus on bookshelves and floor standing speakers, and obviously, you know, they have their different pros and cons. Oftentimes, the room is a huge factor in which you choose. But is there ever a time where you prefer? Let's say you have room space for both. Is there ever a time where you would rather have, and I'm not talking about near field listening at a desk or in a very small area, but a decent sized room. Is there any ever a time where you would prefer a bookshelf with perhaps a subwoofer or an array of subwoofers versus just floor standing speakers? Is there a time where you would choose one versus the other? If you have sufficient space, do you always go floor standers, or do you like bookshelves with or without a sub for whatever reason over a floor standard?
Well, I think it boils down to whatever gets the job done for the space. You know, if the subwoofers are necessary, then of course you're going to use them. But let's say if you somehow have a bookshelf that extends down to 30 hertz in that room that you're using it in, and doesn't have too many room mode issues, then subwoofer won't be necessary. But if you have issues, then of course you'll need a subwoofer, and then you have to place it around and compensate for that somehow. Same thing with basically any speaker setup, I'd say.
But is there an advantage to doing that? And let's say you do need the sub and you place the sub to even out the room modes and things like that. Is there an inherent advantage of that versus just having a floor stander? Especially when you're talking about upper bass, mid bass, upper bass. Is there an advantage to the floor stander with its integrated woofers?
Well, let's see. Oh, sorry, if Nick wants to go at it.
That's okay. First of all, I'd like to know this bookshelf that can get down to 30, because you're
What
talking.
bookshelves can get down to 30?
Yes, yes. I want to know, and I want to know the dollar signs that are behind that puppy.
How loud does the 530 go? That's what I want to know.
Did you say loud or low?
Low.
Oh, I don't think I couldn't name any bookshelves to get down to 30. But
I couldn't name any either, but that's what I'm saying. Like if you need a sub to get the job done, which you probably will with most bookshelves, then of course you're gonna get a sub, unless you don't like sub bass.
This is how I look at this topic. If you have floor standers, if they don't go very low, you're going to need a sub depending on the type of music. My floor standers don't need them, but I've had times where I've also had a set of bookshelves, and I got them for a different sound. You're going to have your tall speakers, and they're going to have one sound. And if you want to change the sound without purchasing more speakers, you get a set of bookshelves, and most of those are going to need subs. Well, I have subs for my theater that I know where the dial in is for my KEF LS50s, my bookshelves, and I have a couple other pair, but so it's one or the other. It depends on what flavor of sound I want to hear, for the type of music I'm wanting to listen to at that time. for me, it's just a matter of turning two switches, and I can be listening to two different amps, two different sets of speakers, and subs if I need them. I just power them up. But so yeah, it's to me, it's taking advantage of the two different types of sounds for the different types of music you want to hear. As far as advantage of one over the other, buying one set, floor standards versus bookshelves, it just depends on which you fall in love with for the high and mid, and you can always fill with a sub. You can always blend that in if you know what you're doing, and you have a room, and most rooms are going to need a sub. I can't, like I said, I couldn't think of any speakers, even though the LS50s go, kind of low, they don't fill the bottom. So it just, and I don't think you're going to save money going with bookshelves when you have to fill in with a sub versus buying just floor standards that you don't need sub with. So,
well, I think there is a. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna say right now.
Yeah.
There is a practical reason. I think if you have, let's say, big floor standing speakers that can hit very low, but then you do have room mode issues. Well, but you've already found a good space for the floor standards, and you're gonna need a sub to fill in the room modes. So I guess you can't really do that with individual floor standards. It's kind of awkward. But yeah, I think that's it for me.
All right.
I think there's a bit of. Hang on.
A lot of people say the argument is, well, I wanted the bookshelves because they don't take up more room. Well, they take up the exact same amount of room because you have to put them on stands.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
You have a bookshelf?
Well, if you have a bookshelf, chances are it's too close to the wall, unless they're front ported. But even then, they're going to produce sound off the back. You're going to get heavy reflection off the wall, so you're not going to want them that close anyway.
Baffle step reflections, more bass.
I missed that.
But you get more bass.
Oh, you would get more bass, but at the cost of your mids and highs?
Well, it's all about the bass.
Oh, well, if that's what you're into, there you go.
All right. And this is going to be the final topic for the podcast. I want to talk about pro audio a bit, and pro audio speakers and pro audio gear, but for the focus would be speakers. Versus what I call hi-fi speakers or boutique speakers, things like that. So for example, comparing brands like ATC and Magico, or for example comparing brands like Proac and Wilson. So the question is it the case that you would think that the professional speakers are built to a very high standard because they're very very kind of mission critical and that kind of thing? And now a lot of the professional companies are kind of catering to audiophiles as well, like ATC as an audiophile line, or kind of a more kind of consumer line rather than the professional line. Is it the case that these professional companies actually offer better value than the hi-fi speakers in general? Obviously, you can't generalize necessarily across the board. A lot of these topics I recognize it's very much dependent on which exact speaker, which exact brand. But in general, do you find when you compare pro audio versus the boutique guys that there's a value proposition to be had in pro audio?
I'll speak because I missed the last couple. Yeah, I definitely think there is. I mean, we were just looking at those Aries speakers that I got to hear last night, and Juan and I and you were talking, Smod, that, I mean, none of their drivers are built in-house. They're using, RALs, JBL, Fostex drivers in a fairly nice cabinet and stuff, but it's like crazy money that you're paying, and nothing's actually designed in-house. Whereas you look at like ATC, who like actually build their own drivers in-house and stuff like that, and their systems are tested in anechoic chambers. The engineering that goes into them is pretty extreme, and that's not to say that YG and Wilson haven't done some extreme engineering, but these speakers are similar price points, and you don't see Wilson in mixing and mastering studios worldwide. They're not considered reference by pretty much anyone in the industry, anyone who matters. So I don't know. I think there's definitely a value proposition with stuff like ATC and proac, and I'm biased in that I went down the pathway of Pro Audio. I think Pro Audio DACs and stuff as well, a lot of people overlook them, and I mean, these are the things that your music's mixed and mastered on half the time, so it's not a bad idea to explore that avenue, because I think there's some great performance to value in those DACs as well. But I mean, what you're paying for is exclusivity and stuff. Sometimes with these bespoke brands, you're paying for nice finishes, rarity, limited editions, that sort of stuff, which doesn't really matter in the pro audio scene. They don't really cater to that side of the market too much. But I think ATC kind of do now, where they offer burl finishes and stuff like that, and pricier finishes, because they know there's a market in the hi-fi and audiophile side of things, beyond just the pro audio guys who don't care. They just want matte black. They want something they can throw in the back of a van and cart around to different studios and stuff like that. But it's also good in that ATC builds their speakers to be handled like that. You talk to ATC about I bumped my speaker, is it going to be okay? They're like, yeah, you pretty much could drop the thing like a meter and it'd probably be okay. They build their stuff to be used in a pro audio setting as well, which is nice to know. But I don't know. I think Wilson, for me, as a value proposition, I think you're paying more for exclusivity than performance. I've heard the performance, and I think it's again a coloration and tuning preference thing maybe that people are paying for. But yeah, not a huge fan of some of the super bespoke Magico, YG, even Martin. None of those really wanted me to part with my money. But yeah, ATC managed to make me do it, so that should speak volumes, for at least for my experience.
Yeah, when I was looking at speakers, that this is something that I kind of came across too. And I found that you can get professional speakers that are actually relatively affordable, and when I looked at, for example, I have the ATC Bookshelves, the smallest one, the SCM7s, and when I looked at them, I heard them, looked at them, to just felt them, I was blown away by the quality of how well they're made, and how amazing they sound. And I did take a look at a lot of other bookshelf speakers that are kind of in the same price range from boutique brands, and the quality was just not the same. It was definitely you could see that the cabinet wasn't as nicely made, and maybe didn't sound as good, and that kind of thing. So this is something that I just started thinking about, that I think that a lot of pro audio gear, not everything obviously, but for example, Quested, Hans Zimmer's favorite brand, they offer speakers that are relatively affordable in the high end, compared to, as Zach was talking about, some of these bespoke speakers that quite frankly are insanely expensive. And then the question to my mind is, well, is Wilson XLFs that are like 100 or 150K, are they any better than like a 20 or 30K Quested setup in terms of raw technical performance and that kind of thing? Of course, there's the preference factor. There's the factor of somebody maybe wants a bit more warmth or bass, or they want a certain frequency kind of response. But in terms of technicality, detail extraction and resolution, clarity, imaging, like a lot of things that are somewhat technical in terms of when you're it's like the technical aspects of subjective listening. Are those bespoke brands where you pay a lot more money, are they performing sonically better than the pro audio? And that's something I'm curious about.
Yeah, I'll have to let the other guys weigh in, but I think when you said raw technical performance, I think the Questeds will absolutely destroy the Wilsons. Honestly, you're paying for like the appearance of them, the rarity, the exclusivity, the cost of the cost of owning something, rare, and it's like buying a Rolex or like a Swiss made watch. But at the same time, like at least when you're buying a Swiss made watch, you're getting some level of quality control. I don't even think you get that with the Wilsons. I think you're just paying a lot of money for a bit of a flex, and they'd be lucky to have the performance of a 20 grand Quested, I reckon.
And that's what's so that's what's so interesting to me, because I like high end systems and high fidelity sound and pushing sound as far as I can, but I like the idea of paying less and getting more sonic performance, and I'm willing to sacrifice, and to me, I don't know, in my opinion, a lot of this pro audio gear looks really nice. I love the build quality. I love the blacked out appearance of my ATCs. So, for me, it's kind of a win-win situation, because you get that build and you get that kind of look, plus you get incredible performance for the money, right? So why not? The way I see it is, it's almost like if you look at cars, it's like, why not pay less and get a car that can perform as well as a Rolls Royce or some crazy Lamborghini? Because
when you walk into the store, the hi-fi store, the Wilson store, and you tell them that you have active Questeds, they will look at you like you're like some piece of dirt, and your ego will be hurt, and they will play music to you. They'll play audiophile music, and they will say things. They will say things like, "Oh, this is just so romantic. It's so musical. The sound is so pure. It's so full. I bet your Questeds don't sound like this." And it'll do things differently. And it's a salesman. Like, this is their fucking job, is to sell stuff to you. So and the more expensive these things are, you want to talk about, oh, they make 10% margin, but the speaker costs $250,000. Quested probably make like a 1% margin. Like, it's just it's marketing, man. Like, you go look at Barefoot Audio. Go look at some videos of the cabinet resonance and the dampening that they apply to this, because the engineering that goes into them is phenomenal. Like, you listen, YG like measures like how many grams of stuffing they put into their speakers, like, great, but like the engineering behind it is like nowhere near the level of like some of these high-end pro brands that are like, their job is to end up in studios all over the world, where no compromise studios, infinite baffle, soffit mounted. They've got the best guys in the industries who mix and master for a living. They don't buy Wilson. You don't see them queuing up every time Magico has a release. Even Focal, like, not many of them are using Focal. Like, even the pro audio side of Focal is not that strong in the industry. So I don't know. Right. I think that to me, it says a lot. And the resale as well says a lot too. You look at the higher end pro stuff, like, it never comes up on the market. People buy this stuff and they buy it for 10, 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's a kind of it's potentially a little bit of a, maybe to some people, a bit of a secret, because I feel like many audiophiles actually look down on pro audio gear, and actually there's this notion that, yeah, of course there's the whole kind of aspect of flexing and like wanting your gear to look a certain way, but I think a lot of audiophiles actually feel that pro audio gear is not as good as boutique gear, and I think what we're saying here is that that's not really necessarily true.
Well, yeah, and I think this is a good time to introduce I think something that we've all been getting to this conversation, is that there is an audiophile tax. Okay. Because right. Yeah, like you said yourself, some people there's a lot of preconceptions, and so some preconceptions are that, oh yeah, my audiophile gear with some, I don't know, that advertises some crazy special material or something like that would, it would be totally amazing compared to any pro speaker. I don't even want to look at these pro speakers. Those are for nerds. It's, so companies, companies know this, and they will take advantage of that, because they know that people are willing to pay more. So, hence audiophile tax.
Yeah,
and I think that's where a lot of these price creeps come in, things like that. And it applies to anything like that, but yeah.
Because you would think that some of this technology, like for example, the magico footers, right, where he talks about how they use this incredible engineering to get the curvature of the footer right for the M series speakers and that kind of thing, and it's so advanced and stuff. You would think that if that is so advanced and really so game changing, that's something that the pro audio guys would have figured out a long time ago, right? Because their stuff is very mission critical and very of of the utmost importance. So why wouldn't
That's a
they?
very interesting point, Simon. Because you're right. Like,
Well,
why aren't they looking at the footers and stuff? It's because they soffit mount most of their stuff, which is going to be better than floor mounting it. So most of the time, these
Right.
guys, when they're running in the absolute high end, they don't have to worry about that because they're not mounted on a desk or anything. They're soffit mounted.
Or for example, let's pick a speaker. So Magico M9, right? This is the new flagship. It's all carbon fiber, and not only is it all carbon fiber, but there's also, or the shell of it, I guess. There's an in between honeycomb aluminum layer of the cabinet that's supposed to enhance the sound, and they're 750K. Okay, they're like 1,000 pounds. So that all that technology of the cabinet, or yeah, take YG, and they have the metal drivers, metal cabinet. If that really translated to superior performance in all different metrics, again, under obviously we have to take in subjective preference, but looking at our normal kind of technicalities that we talk about, if those were so game changing and so important, you would think that the pro audio people would have already been doing them or would have adopted it. The fact that they're not, to me, tells me that it's very possible that that's just it's not substantial, it's not consequential in terms of sonic performance.
well, the truth is that often that is the case. Way too often, actually, in my opinion. So
Right.
that's just the nature of our industry.
And
Well,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I want to hear you go out.
Just the last thing I was going to say about it is that, of course, the professional guys in general are also not used to paying probably the insane fees of these high-end boutique speakers, right? I don't think professional guys are used to paying $1 million for a pair of floor standers. So I mean, there's that aspect of it as well, that the pro audio people know that they can charge these obscene amounts, but I think that's sorry,
because they know that they don't need to spend that much money.
Right, exactly. So I think this is actually a really important topic because it could probably help a lot of people to get the most for their dollar. To if they're not taking pro audio seriously, explore it, especially because a lot of the pro audio dealers do cater to audiophiles. It's not like you have to go through like some have to have a special pass to get into the pro audio world. You could just call up your dealer, and they often have even a line that focuses on typical kind of consumers, and explore that and have a listen, and you might be very surprised.
Yeah, for sure. They're very accommodating. You go to these stores and they'll have 50 pro audio speakers all hooked up to like a little preamp thing, and you just select which one you want to hear, and you can listen to like 30 or 40 speakers in like a matter of like 10 minutes and just play the one track and flick between them. It's really fun because you can you don't get to hear them in their ideal situation, but you get an idea of what the driver can do. And I think I started off my speaker journey in vintage, and then I bought pro audio, and I kind of wish I mean, the vintage was fun, but at the same time, like, I didn't realize how shitty it was until I got some like decent pro audio speakers, and then I tried a lot of modern speakers, and I couldn't actually get much to beat them, and then I ended up going full hog and buying like the hi-fi line of a pro audio speaker. Anyway, gents, you keep talking. I got to run to the gym. My class starts at 10:30, which is in 10 minutes, and I got to drive across town. So thank you for having me. Thanks for the show, and I'll catch you all next week.
See you around.
All right, Zach. Thanks a lot. Take care. All right. So that was my final topic. Nick, I don't think I think you were going to weigh in on that. Okay, I don't think Nick's there. So that was
Nick
it. That was. Oh, Nick, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had mute.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that? On the pro audio and
Well,
yeah.
Start with my first question was obviously after listening for a while with what's pro audio? Because my definition isn't what y'all been talking about.
I guess
So,
my definition of pro audio is a company that primarily does, the majority of their business is focused on people who work for who are not listening for enjoyment, but who are listening for production, music production, or doing work, or recording professionals, and they're selling the majority of what they do is selling and catering to those people. That's my definition of pro audio.
right, okay. Because when I heard that, I was like, pro audio. Old school is, okay, you need to get the sound to the back of the room. Because the pro,
honestly, that used to be the goals, yeah.
right? I mean, Wall of Sound comes to mind, Grateful Dead. Might be before y'all.
Well, I think
But
you're talking about a certain subset of pro audio, PA gear
right.
and all that.
Actually, that wasn't even pro. That was invented by the Dead, putting it in the back of huge stage. Anyway, so now that I
Yes.
get what you're talking about, yeah, I get some of the pro gear is the speakers you were talking about. Yeah, you want it to come across as good as you can, but it's only when you start dealing with mixers and all of that. That's what I'm hearing from pro gear. And because you're creating the music for the masses to listen to. Am I off there or on?
Right? No, you're right.
Right.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
right.
So if you're doing all that, you are basically, nobody else is going to be listening to this music with the caliber of gear that the pros are using. So you want to make it to the best of their ability for the lesser gear to hear it at its highest ability, which to a point, there's somewhere you're going to have, which means it has to be at the highest level. You just got to realize that the most common denominator amongst the masses is going to be at a much lower quality, a much lower level. So, right, yeah. And with that said, anytime if you like dialing in and dealing with your music a lot to get your quote unquote house sound, then you would probably want to purchase the pro audio gear. My Tech, one of my favorites, they do some pro, but not a lot. But my DAC, I have an infinite number of abilities to make my DAC do, but it's nothing to the quality of what these pros are using. So as far as the rest of it is, I'm got this bit of education under my belt now, and I'm grateful for it. But yeah, I don't see that most people are going to go with that extreme dollar level amount to be able to play with their music. Basically, most people want to render the music how the engineers of the artist made their sound. You know what I'm saying? I'll take that as a no.
Yeah, no, I think I know what you're saying. Yeah.
But the artist is never going to, the engineer and the artist are never going to agree on what they want. The engineer is trying to sell the product, and the band or the artist, until they make it huge and great, is basically going to take the advice of his director and his engineers. What's going to sell? Let's get our foot in the door until you make it huge, and then you get to make all those detailed decisions. But for the majority of music that's out there, it's going to be with the engineers, the people that use this pro gear, decide what that sound's going to be. So it all comes down to the engineers versus the artist again, which until you make it huge is a good thing, because you're just trying to get recognized and get paychecks. And I think this topic is beyond most of our folks' utility. And I don't think they're really looking to do that much with it, even though they want the highest quality of rendering of the music. I don't think that most folks are going to want to change the music to the caliber. I guess I'm talking on the electronic side, not so much the speaker side. The speaker side, you want to render most precisely what the engineers have produced and put out on disc or vinyl or streaming, however they produced it. So, and that's where the dollar ends at as much as you got. Not saying that you're going to get the best speaker for the highest number of dollars, but it's like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry. What sounds best to you? That's all I got to say to that. So I guess we can wrap it up unless Juan has something else to say. Go ahead, Smud.
No, I appreciate that, Nick. Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at the electronic side of it. I think that it gets definitely a little more complicated, and there's the whole notion of active versus passive and having a chain. How obviously there is advantages to having passive and then having components so that you can tune the sound the way you want and that kind of thing. So there is more to it than simply go for pro audio for sure. I agree. Juan, any final words? Nick, Juan, any final words before we close it out?
I don't really. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, besides like things like the exorbitant sort of, I guess, prices placed on certain audiophile gear. I guess it all just comes down to whatever gets the job done for you. That's it.
For sure. All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks a lot for the for your time and for your contribution. It was a great episode, and hopefully we'll see you for the next episode. Everybody listening, thanks a lot. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Smud.
Thank
Juan.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Take
Good
care.
night.
Bye. Bye.